This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app. Evenings with Kevin O'Sullivan
On Talk Radio.
I'm joined in the studio now by a political commentator from Young Voices UK, Connor Tomlinson. Good evening, Connor.
Good evening, Kevin. It's weird to be in on a Tuesday. We like to keep everyone on their toes.
That's right. We've changed you around a bit this week, haven't we? But good to have you here. I want to talk about Austria, and hopefully it's not the sign of times to come all across Europe, but Austria has become, I believe, the first country in the world, certainly the first in Europe, to make the COVID jab enforceable by law. It is now against the law not to be vaccinated against COVID in Austria. That's medical fascism, isn't it?
Well, the same de facto things coming in potentially in Germany, the same de facto things potentially coming in Australia, where they're building COVID quarantine camps, where you can't go and get your hair cut, you can't have a job, and you're fined on the day if you get the jab. This is terrifying, and it's particularly terrifying to people like me, who will be affected and made second-class citizens if this kind of policy comes in Britain, as even ex-GPs are trying to mandate now, as you saw on Julia's show earlier in the week. The scary thing is, if they turn around and say, okay, if you can't, first of all, if you're not double vaccinated, which the definition keeps changing anyway, because it was 2 jabs and now it's 2 jabs and a booster. If you're not double vaccinated, you can't live a civil life, etc. Let's put aside the idea that the vaccines are 100% effective and they don't wane over time. Let's put aside the idea that you might have objections to how the vaccines might be made with the embryonic stem cells, or that the fact that the taxpayer has to fund it, right? If the jab has to go to everyone, not everyone needs the jab. Because I personally can't get Moderna and Pfizer, for example, because I have anaphylaxis. Now that triggers an anaphylactic reaction that is far more likely to kill me than COVID is. So if they cared about it being effective and ethical, they test for antibodies, which I have because I had COVID and it was mild head cold and I was completely fine. But that's not what it's about. If they cared if I was immune, they'd test me. No, it's about making you have the vaccine. It's about making it so that the vaccine companies have a larger customer base, and it's so about control, so they ensure that you have to take this procedure, and that's very concerning.
Yes, I mean, there are all sorts of theories as to why this is going on. You've laid out one certainly valid argument for the compulsory nature of these vaccines, because don't forget, in Austria, no bones about it, it's against the law not to have the vaccine. In other countries, it's near as damn it. So in Germany, for example, the vaccine passport rules are so strict that you have this medical apartheid, a totally divided society, people shuffling along the streets, not allowed into bars, not allowed into restaurants, not allowed into shops. These are the unvaccinated, these are the unwashed. You must not even cast your eyes upon them. So they've got that. Meanwhile, the rest of society gets on with their lives, allowed to do all the normal things that we do. Now, so that is as near as damn it mandatory vaccines. If you don't get vaccinated, you cannot participate in normal life. You'd think, I don't want to go too far down this line, but you'd think 2 countries like Austria and Germany, with their history, they might have cause for concern about such authoritarianism.
Yeah, they might have reservations about forgetting the lessons of history they'd said they would definitely never forget. A lot of people also overlooking Lithuania have been so severe, even before Austria, that now if you don't have a vaccine passport, you can't enter a supermarket. So there have had to be underground grocery shopping networks between unvaccinated people to pass like celery and potatoes back and forward. We laugh, but it is genuinely terrifying.
Speakeasies for cabbages.
Exactly. That's the scary sort of thing. And
want to buy some broccoli?
Yeah. Well, so the government doesn't catch us having a beer, mate. But it's genuine Iron Curtain style stuff. And these were countries that were occupied by the Soviets. These were countries that had to fend off all sorts of fascist regimes in the 20th century. And you think they'd be very reserved about demonizing a group of people, quarantining them in their homes, doing what Australia does and making them go to camps, and forcing them to have medical procedures again.
Yeah. The death rates, though, I mean, I know cases are soaring all over the place, but the death rates are still relatively low. And I'm just wondering whether all these governments, including ours, have just lost track of what it is they're doing, what it is that is causing them to do this. It's COVID, not a nice condition, definitely a problem, still a pandemic, but, certainly in this country, comparatively, it's not really killing that many people, and yet the reaction to it, the official reaction to it, is immense. surely we should get this into proportion. Surely Austria should get it into proportion. Germany, France, they should all get it into proportion. They seem to have lost that sense of precaution.
As I said, if they were concerned about immunity, they would test for antibodies, because natural immunity has a much better immunity rate than a lot of the vaccines. I know over here we don't have Johnson & Johnson, but in America they tested a bunch of the military servicemen who had Johnson & Johnson, the single dose. After 6 months it dropped down to 3%, so they needed a booster. The only one that doesn't seem to have the need for a booster is AstraZeneca, which is the only one I could have, for example. But then I could never have a booster, so I'd never be double vaccinated, so what would the point be anyway? And funnily enough, that's the only one that aren't making them a cost. But you raise a really important point. It's about the efficacy of the vaccine. And a lot of the other talk radio hosts, and don't get me wrong, I've been on some of their shows and I love them, obviously not as much as you, but they don't have the conversation about the fact that the ONS statistics from the 39th to the 46th week show that most people that die from COVID are double vaccinated. So it's not that saying, oh, the vaccine doesn't work in entirety, it saved plenty of people. But it does mean that the people that are very old, or they have comorbidities, or they're morbidly obese, are more susceptible. And it's a bigger factor for that than if they're vaccinated.
I mean, you have to be very careful with statistics, because that could also be that certainly in the age groups you're talking about, the vast majority of people have been double vaccinated, and therefore the numbers of deaths will be higher. They're too old to save,
which is totally fine. But that means that you can't predicate my civil liberties on a vaccine that can't save everybody.
It can't save everybody, and it can't stop people catching it. It can't stop people passing it on, which is what's worrying. And it's just the way that it seems to have become a gateway for governments all over the world, including ours, especially Austria and Germany, for this immense illiberalism.
It's also very concerning that we have people in our institutions pushing for this kind of stuff when we've meant to be venerating them for the last year. We've been standing on our doorsteps clanging pots and pans. You've got Adrian Charles in The Guardian saying, ask not what the NHS can do for you, say what can I do for the NHS. We've treated them as a national religion, and then we're having ex-GPs not only come out and sit in the road with Insulate Britain, but they're also coming out on Talk Radio in the Mail and saying, hey, we should lock down the unvaccinated. We should mandate COVID jabs. We should make it illegal for you to be ill. I am very concerned about the strain of illiberalism that is populating the NHS. Because we've had it with the BLM protests, we've had it with the climate stuff, we've had it with Insulate Britain, and now we're having it with COVID. What is it about the saviour complex that some of the ex-GPs get? Is it that we're told we can't criticise them? Is it they get tons of money? Is it that they are told they're saving lives every day and so we owe everything to them? Some NHS staff are great, but the proportion of people that are coming out in favour of medical tyranny is genuinely scary.
Medical tyranny, that's the word for it. And a lot of doctors seem to think that it's perfectly all right to make vaccinations mandatory by law. And I've got bad news for them. It certainly isn't. And you say, ask not what what you may do for the NHS, and all that. I'll tell you what I'm not doing for the NHS anymore is protecting it. It's about time the NHS protected me and protected the rest of the population and stopped telling us not to bother it, especially if we're sick. That has been disastrous. Connor, great to see you. Connor Tomlinson there from the Young Voices UK organisation. He'll be in again next week. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is Talk Radio.